Everyone. I'm going to call to order the Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure. First thing is our minutes, and I believe we want to continue those.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this morning we noticed an omission on the March 14th minutes that we would like to get that language added and bring that back to the next meeting for approval.
Do we need a motion on that, or
I think it would be good to move to
can
continue.
I have a motion, please, to continue?
I move to continue
Okay.
item 1.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Consent items 2 and 3. Do you have any questions? Motion?
I have questions about item 3.
Move approval of item 1 on the consent agenda?
Do I have a
Second. Sorry.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, 1 is passed. 2, your question is?
This is an RFP to help the small businesses on the South Central line.
I think it's a request
Or
for
is
a
it,
grant.
it's a request for,
This is, Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Pastor, this is actually a request to authorize staff to issue the RFP
okay,
for the grant that was awarded by the Federal Transit Administration for Transit-Oriented Development, which is also to help with the planning and land use, as well as business assistance for the South Central Light Rail project.
so this is the grant that we, not grant, the $2.4 million that we received from the federal government. And my understanding is LISC and La Raza are also putting additional funding.
That's correct. It's a $2 million grant. $400,000 is the City of Phoenix match amount. And then LISC and RASA Development Fund each contributed $50,000 toward small businesses and the furtherance of the grant. So that's in addition to the 2.4 million.
And they're not applying to be part of it.
And we confirmed that they will not be applying for or proposing on this RFP.
Okay, so this grant is a proposal for those to apply to help the community and local businesses with South Central?
To assist with the administration of this grant and carrying out the work of this grant for the transit-oriented development planning and preparing the business assistance planning, working with those businesses to identify needs and develop strategies to address those needs for South Central Rail construction during that time.
Okay, thank you.
You have a motion?
I move item number 3.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further comments? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item 4 through 7 are for information only. Do you have any questions? Okay.
On item 6, just wanted to, we are working with staff in our district on the 24th Street bus line. And so that's not proposed for October changes, but we'll continue to work for the next available deadline on that to make sure we got the 24th Street. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Takes us to item 8.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, item 8 is as you know, a very important item for the Phoenix community, South Central Light Rail. This item is actually for an amendment to our agreement with Valley Metro to increase the funding amount by $50 million, which actually would be there to pay for the work that needs to be done in the engineering phase of this project. This would enter the project into the design and engineering phase to get that work done. Pre-construction would take place over the next 2 years. With me here today is Albert Santana, our high capacity transit director, and Scott Smith, who is the former Mesa mayor and current Valley Metro CEO. And so they're going to just talk with a little bit more detail about what this item is and give a little bit of background to what got us here today and what the next steps are going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Albert Santana.
Thank you, Mario, Chair Williams, members of the subcommittee. So today what we would like to do is to give you a quick background on what we've gone through on this project since its inception and kind of what the next steps will be as we move forward in advancing this project. This here is just a map to kind of orient you with the corridor. Again, I think you may have seen it before, but it's a 5.5-mile extension that would connect downtown Phoenix via Central Avenue to ultimately Central and Baseline. And as a part of that extension, there would be 7 stations included in the South Central Light Rail extension. And to Mario's point, one of the things we did want to do today is that given that these projects do take between 8 to 10 years, and we live and breathe this on a daily basis, you all get to see this as we come for updates, but we thought it would be important to give you a little project background and history. And the slide in front of you there shows some of the key dates that we've had, and I've highlighted a column that shows specifically different times where we've come to council for action on various elements of this program. Beginning when we first got started in 2011 via then Congressman Pastor with a feasibility study that kicked us off in January of 2011. And one that I'd like to highlight was more recent as we moved forward in November of 2014. We had several actions that came before the City Council specific to roadway configuration, the 4-lane and 2-lane. We also finalized the station locations, and at that point, we got council action to move forward and initiate the environmental work. And in January 2016, which was a result of the Phoenix voters moving forward with Prop 104, Phoenix Transportation 2000, we came to City Council and asked for your approval on accelerating the South Central Corridor from 2034 to 2023, and that's where we are today. One of the things that has been consistent, and Valley Metro and their team on public involvement have done a very good job and a very in-depth, comprehensive public involvement process. Since March 21st, as the slide shows, we've had 180 meetings, and actually that number is dated as they've had several other one-on-one meetings with Scott we'll talk about a little later. And these come in many different forums as you're dealing with a large corridor, a very diverse area, and so you want to make sure you offer multiple means on how you can communicate with the community. So everything from one-on-one meetings to public meetings, working with neighborhood services and Parks and Recreation Department to attend local community events and have opportunities to present to the people in the area. Also, meetings focused specifically with the business community. Valley Metro also put out feedback forms and surveys. And the second item on there talks about the environmental assessment, and I'll have a slide on that a little later about the scope of work that was done during environmental assessment. But Valley Metro did do a very good job on making the environmental assessment work very open to the public, and as a result, we received 59 actual written comments that came in from the community that Valley Metro and their staff, as a part of the environmental assessment process, did respond to. And just to put it a little bit into context, recently Valley Metro did an environmental assessment on a Tempe streetcar project, and that project is moving along and with much success as well. And on that environmental assessment document, they received 13 comments. You typically it's a very technical process, but given the transit knowledge that we have in the corridor and the interest from the community, we did receive a lot of comments during the environmental assessment, which is really good for us to hear. And one of the things that had come up through that process is an inquiry that has come through some of your offices today, specific to the roadway configuration, because that is something that is a change, that something for the community needs time to kind of absorb and see what does that really look like. And so what Valley Metro and their staff did was really look at it from hearing comments from the community on how to balance the different inquiries that were coming in, but also looking at it from how do we do two things. As we introduce light rail into Central City South, into South Phoenix, how can we do so in a way that would preserve the legacy, the culture, and the history of those neighborhoods and minimize impacts onto the existing businesses and existing community, while at the same time something that would build towards a more healthy future for those corridors. And that really became kind of the theme of the project, to be able to preserve that legacy while at the same time building towards a more positive future. So this next graphic here shows when we looked at 4 lanes versus 2 lanes, and the differences between the right-of-way impacts between 4 lane and 2 lanes was pretty substantial, and really kind of met the need of how do you preserve that legacy, preserve small businesses, preserve the area when you introduce something like light rail. So that was one part of the assessment when we looked at roadway configuration. However, the other part, which is equally important, if not more important, is we need to make sure that whatever we propose is a corridor that keeps the area very active and provides the ability for individuals to be able to traverse and travel through the area with whatever the proposed design was. So when you look at this next slide, The no-build option, which is what we would test against, shows around 33,600 between what you have today between automobiles and bus. And looking at from opening day when we would introduce light rail under a 2-lane configuration between automobiles, bus, and light rail, we still have a very vibrant, active area, which is a very important part, especially when you want to keep, from a small business perspective, or just an area that has a lot of vibrancy to it. So those were things that Valley Metro did as a part of their environmental work leading into when we came back to council, which this slide shows. In November 2014, we again brought back several items which spoke to recommendations to roadway configuration, where the exact stations would be, and then again getting your approval to initiate the environmental work. And during that time, we then began the environmental work in January 2015, and some of the scope that we do are very detailed assessments on preliminary design elements, noise and vibration. Those are always very sensitive issues, especially when you're dealing with areas of town that maybe are a little older and have historic features, and so they did noise and vibration testing. Also, preliminary utility investigation. That really was a lesson learned between the City of Phoenix and Valley Metro. Utilities are a major part of the construction, and so what we'd like to do now is during this environmental phase is try to do our best to locate where all of our utility infrastructure is at, so that way we can minimize the amount of unknown conflicts with utilities when we move into construction, which are very impactful on the community whenever we have those unknown utility hits. And then, of course, an inventory on historical and cultural resources, and then public scoping meetings at the beginning at 50%, and then at the end of the environmental assessment to make sure that the public has access to all of the technical work being done and that staff is available to make sure that they have all their questions addressed. The budget to do that work was $3.2 million, of which 50% actually came to us via the Federal Transit Administration through a Tiger grant. And then just a few months ago this year, January 2006, we did receive what's called a FONSI, but it's a fancy acronym that says we got the project environmentally cleared through the Federal Transit Administration. And really at this point, I'd like to pass to Scott to talk to you about some of the recent activities that him and his team at Valley Metro have done in working with the community, as well as some of the next steps as we move forward into what we're recommending today, which is to move forward into the final design. So Scott, if you can.
Thanks, Albert, and Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's great to be here. A little different being on this side of the rostrum, but I'll get used to it. You know, as Albert said, this process is an ongoing process, and one thing that's important is as we move into what we talk about conceptual design, environmental assessments into final design, it doesn't mean that many of the activities that we started many years ago will stop. For example, public outreach. We talked about the literally almost 200 separate meetings, both large group meetings, small group meetings, and one-on-one meetings that have happened to get to this point. Well, just because we now say, okay, now we're going to final design, doesn't mean that those stop. As a matter of fact, in many ways, they become more intense. They become more specified. And perhaps what I could do is maybe explain what it means to go into final design. As Albert said, we live this. We start talking inside baseball type of thing. But I have to go back to my home building days. And we used to design new homes. And what we'd do is we'd start out with a footprint. And we would design that home. We'd figure out where the bedrooms go, and oh, it looks nice for the nook and the kitchen and all these kind of things. And we'd design it pretty well. We'd also do a rendering of an elevation. We'd have, put gables, would figure out how the roof fits on. And that was all done to scale, and it all worked. And that was really what we've been doing right now. We've been doing that, we've been deciding where the kitchen goes and if we want this entry or that entry. Then you move into the final design. And on a house, what that means is you may show a place where cabinets go. Well, now we're going to design the cabinets. You now have to design that roof looked real nice. Now we need to engineer that roof to make sure that the trusses fit well, that the load factors are okay, and that the walls, bearing walls, are in the right place. And as you go through that process, normally things play out. You find that what you design conceptually, because there's a lot of detailed work that goes into that works. But, when I designed my home, believe me, my wife was deeply involved in the cabinet design because that was what was important to her. She was deeply involved into the spaces for the appliances and what kind of appliances, make sure that we could do what she wanted to do. Well, we're doing the same thing on South Central. We've designed the streets and the interaction to meet the basic needs, but now we're going to sit down with many individual businesses to make sure that their specific needs are met. Now, what happens normally in, for example, a house design is that usually there are tweaks that come. Sometimes you'll find that that roof design that looks so nice, when you get into engineering, it needs a little bit more than a tweak. We might find that as we go through final design. And if that's the case, we will adjust. We might even come back to you. The adjustments may be minor, they may be significant, but it is an ongoing process. With the idea that at the end of the day, we've talked to everybody, we've made everybody understand, and they've had input, and then we come up with a final set of plans that we can then turn over to our construction team and they can actually build. And that's the process we've entered in now. So I think you understand that, and in many ways, while we are moving from one chapter to the next chapter, in no ways does it lessen the input, the connection, the contacts, and in many ways, we're now addressing the specifics of issues that will truly define how this will be built and how it will play out and how it will impact individual properties and individual businesses. And that's the process that will take about 2 years. It is not a short process. It's a long and involved process that involves many people. We have chosen a design team led by AECOM. We were very, very happy because one of the criteria that we put forth in our RFP for our design team is that they take community involvement to the next level. More than just, or far beyond just the basic that you see as far as disadvantaged business involvement and those, the check the box type of things. And our review panel came back and they were incredibly impressed with all of the applicants because we put out this challenge. We said, we're not going to tell you how to actually engage the community. We're not going to give you a list. That would be the easy way. We're going to leave it blank and tell you what our expectations are, and we will depend upon you to go out, and if you don't know what it will take, go out and ask the community. Go out and figure out what would work best. And the review panel was very impressed that all of the applicants, especially AECOM, went out and obviously had talked to members of the community, had talked to the groups, and devised a plan where they could not only understand the necessities of continued input, but also came up with a very specific plan to engage many different parts of the community. So we're excited to get going. This is the next step. We can't go forward without this step. And as I've said, it is a long process, but one that has many different steps on it. And so we're anxious to get going and appreciate all of our partnership with the city and with the community, both the groups and the individuals, in devising a program that is and a project that, as Albert said, really does match our overall goal. And that is to understand and recognize and preserve that legacy, that culture, the things that make this this part of the city and of our valley important, but also to build something that creates great opportunity and something better for the future.
And so with that, staff would recommend that the T&I subcommittee recommend council approval to amend the agreement with Valley Metro not to exceed $50 million to complete the final design and pre-construction activities required for the FTA engineering phase. And happy to take any questions.
Actually, we have some cards. Shall we hear those first?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Okay. Petra Falcon?
Petra.
Petra?
Petra.
Sorry. You put it on your head to leave early, so I'm calling you.
Thank you for that. Members of the subcommittee, members of City Council, and community members. Petra Falcon, I'm the Executive Director of Promise, Arizona, but I've also lived in South Phoenix, and what we lovingly call SoFo now, since 1975. And I've raised my 5 children. I worship there at St. Catherine's. My oldest grandchild has actually been baptized at that church. So this is much more than the building of a light rail. This is the continuing growth of a community that has served many, many families for many, many years. It's not a perfect community like anybody else's. It's not that perfect, but it is our community, and we have a lot of ownership. And as an organization, Promise Arizona in 2014 partnered up with Arizona State University and Raza Development Fund because we were interested in hearing from our community what was important to them, not only their past, but also their future. And what was important to them was the maintaining the integrity of the community, because this is where they raised their families, and this is where they wanted to continue to raise their families. And many of the families there have lived for generations and have passed on their properties to their children. And this opportunity to listen to the community was very important to us as an organizing entity, because that's how we do our work. We do not move forward unless we are having these serious conversations with family members. And so we knocked on over 7,000 doors, and we listened to what the families cared about, and they cared about their economic wellness, they cared about their education wellness, and they also cared about their own health wellness. And what does this mean? It means that it needs to translate into opportunities for people to create a ladder to perhaps better jobs, better paying jobs. It means that people need to have access to higher education, and it means that people need to be able to know that they are going to be around so that they can hold their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. I just came back from a 7-day trip in Germany, and the first thing I noticed was that people there were very, very healthy. And the reason that they're healthy is because they have a good healthcare system. So, but the point is that it comes with building community and us being leaders. And at this moment, this project is going to help us do that. It's going to bring investment into the community that has long been ignored from different aspects. And the other thing that Promise Arizona did the following year, without and transparency, we didn't receive any funding for actually getting behind Prop 104. And we knocked on door to door in that community, and we explained what was happening and what the light rail was going to mean to their community. Yes, they had some concerns because they've heard of stories from other neighborhoods, but by and large, the South Phoenix has the highest bus ridership. And we were even critiqued, what is an immigrant rights organization doing supporting a transportation issue? And I said, guess what? People don't have cars, they don't have access to car insurance. There's children or young people that need to get to school or to work. And that's why we backed 104. And so again, I'm getting my time is up, but yes, we're in favor of this project moving forward. And if there's anything else we can do, we'll be doing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor, and
Vidalis.
Videla? What did I do? How
You're
about-
fine. You're fine.
I messed up. I apologize.
You're fine.
It's okay, Chairwoman Williams. Thank you. It's Vidalis. Thank you. My name is Victor Vidalis. I'm a small business owner on South Central. I own Remax New Heights Realty. We're a minority veteran-owned company. Been there for 13 years. And I'm in support of this project. We've worked closely with Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix over the past 5 years as a community member, sitting on different community advisory boards, giving input and also working with them on different strategies, including Valley Metro actually requiring now a workforce development program. So we see this as a great opportunity for South Phoenix to become, not just South Phoenix, but the City of Phoenix, to actually follow other models like Soho in Manhattan, SoDo in Seattle, and actually SoDo in Denver, Lodo in Denver and SoDo in Seattle. We believe SoFo and South Phoenix also has that same opportunity to become this vibrant, pedestrian-oriented, transportation-oriented community. So we're hopeful that not only you guys will bring in the investment of light rail, but the City of Phoenix will also make sure that our streets are more walkable, more livable. We've been on multiple tours with our community in Mesa, and we see the beautiful job that they've done of taking 4 lanes to 2 lanes and making this very walkable community. So we look forward to the same. We actually want to one-up our mayor, Smith, over there in Mesa and South Phoenix, and make this a world-class project for South Phoenix and for the rest of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bobby Wade?
Morning, council member and members of the subcommittee. First, I want to thank you guys for your commitment and service to the community, not only Phoenix, but the South Phoenix area. I have been a homeowner in Phoenix since 2005, South Phoenix. We currently own a business in the South Mountain Plaza on Central and Baseline. It's called Evolve Dance and Fitness. We service the youth in our community, mainly about 95% girls in the area and their parents. We offer fitness for parents while the daughters dance. But I'm here today in favor of moving forward with this light rail project, understanding how South Phoenix is and how it's been a depressed community as of lately, on the rise rather. We invested not only our time but also our resources in South Phoenix. We chose South Phoenix for many reasons. First, understanding that there's nothing like what we're offering to the community. Commitment to the youth, commitment to their parents, and offering fitness as well as dance to a youth that's really needing that now. I understand that there's concerns from other business owners about going from 4 to 2 lanes. As a business owner, we are in favor of this for many reasons. One, most of the transit that we get down through Central Phoenix, down Central, a lot of the people are passing through. You know, a lot of people don't even understand what South Phoenix has to offer, what businesses are there, and if we're able to slow that down a little bit, I think people tend to pick their head up and see what's going on. They start to understand that there's a lot of people and families that's been in this area for a long time that really want to see this environment grow, see this community grow. So with that said, we're just here to encourage that, and hopefully that we can move forward with this project. We know it's going to take a lot of time. We know how these things work. We know people want to slow this down for a lot of personal reasons, but we want to encourage to move forward with the proposal on the table, and hopefully we can get this done and start working as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Diane Barker?
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams and subcommittee. First of all, I want to say that I've had the opportunity for years, 3 decades, to use transit. I'm a big believer in transit. I've spent a lot of time in South Phoenix, having never lived there, but I've ridden the bus down there day and night, and I still ride the bus. And what I'm coming to you is that specifically on this item, I'm asking that staff would get back to me to see that we have, in the city, paid back the $60 million that was extended, and we had to redo Transit 2000 because we were short after 15 years, but this was extended for rail on 19th Avenue. Now, the engineers at Valley Metro Rail, that's one ingredient, it's fixed transit, is coming and asking for more money. What I'm saying is why remake the wheel? The big picture is that we work with all safe, efficient transportation throughout the valley, Maricopa County. We get ADOT to look to even see that up on the I-17, we have a lot of accidents. How we're going to get transit better into the west side. I had an opportunity to go to and work at the NCAA. It was great. The Valley Metro put a extra bus on there. We can never have too much communication. We needed to have someone to identify that as a fast bus. There were patrons that were on there that were missing their stop, and the bus driver said, "I cannot stop, I'll get in trouble." Then there was nobody to help them from Spectrum. We citizens that know the system were helping people that were displaced. When I'm saying do not forget about getting people around. I've sat many times and stood in South Phoenix with over 20 people. They use a flexible system, and Trump wants infrastructure, but he's cutting way back down on many things, and transit's there also. Watch out where we're going. We could end up there.
Thank you. Eva Olivas?
Good morning, committee members, everybody in the audience here. I want to support this. We are very excited. In 2010, the residents of Central City South directed us to support the light rail system. So we've been waiting for a long, long time. We're very, very anxious. Another directive, though, was that we ask that you really protect our businesses. I know that I've been very aggressive about saying take care of our businesses. I know we have one business here who's visiting this meeting as well. But I want to say that we do support it. We're anxious, we're ready, and whatever we can do to help, we want to get the word out. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments, motion?
I have. Thank you. This is
One.
an exciting day for me. I represent one of the 2 council districts that this extension will go through, and it's hard to explain how much enthusiasm we've been hearing. So I would hear from the chair of the South Mountain Village Planning Commission, what's the #1 thing you can do for the community? They would say build the South Central extension. The same for the then head of the South Mountain Chamber of Commerce. We really want this extension. So this is a motion I am very much looking forward to making. I was grateful when the council voted to move this project up by more than a decade. It is certainly a testament to the support when you look at the voter turnout in this area and the support that the voters who live on the extension in this area gave. So thank you to Petra and the folks who helped educate and discuss this with the voters. Thank you to Eva and her community who also built a lot of the grassroots that support for this with meetings after meetings. We are certainly still getting started on the meetings and there's a lot of work to do, but it's been really gratifying to see the support that we've had so far. We have a lot of young people on this extension who need a great way to get to school, either high school or hopefully more and more to higher education as well. So I see a lot of economic opportunity along this extension and building on the work that we are already doing at the City of Phoenix to make sure we do our part to invest and to support the neighbors and the work they are already doing. Just 2 weeks ago, we opened up an iWork facility along this extension, which will help our residents in one part of the district get more jobs. And there's already, I think, 3 nonprofits who are doing economic development in the area. So we have a lot of great partners, and I hope as we move forward, we'll continue to work with the community leaders in the area that are already doing work in the area. It's a very special area. This is an area that has produced many of our city leaders in this building, but also some of our great artists, a lot of our civil rights leaders. It's producing a lot of our startups now. The Warehouse District in particular has seemed to attract a lot of companies that want unique creative spaces. They want buildings that have good stories, good roots, good bones. So we have buildings, many of which are over 100 years old in this area that have been reborn 3 times now, and I think perhaps with light rail coming in will continue to be reborn. So I'm really looking forward to that. That said, we do hear questions from business leaders, so when I make the motion, and thanks to Councilwoman Pastor for her leadership in this area as well, I guess I do want to see, could we do the traffic studies first thing? Could you talk about what we can do on that area and to support business access?
Yeah, Chair Williams and Councilwoman Gallego, as a part of this process, exactly what you described is the work that Valley Metro and their consultants would do, is that as we move and advance this conceptual design into the final design, during that final design phase, they will then first look at the detailed traffic assessment and ensure that the traffic is efficient and meets the needs of the community. And in the event that something arises as a part of that detailed information and we have information substantiating that, then we would then be required to offer whatever mitigation to make sure that we do have a traffic plan that provides efficient traffic flow in the corridor. And that would be one of the items. That is one of the items that is currently in the scope for the final design team that would get to start on that work this summer.
Wonderful.
Did you want to make a motion?
So I guess I would move that we support staff's recommendation with the addition that we prioritize the traffic study early in the process.
Really in the-
Vice Mayor?
So my question is, I would like to see a fully comprehensive traffic analysis with the specific impacts to businesses on the corridor, and then be able to report back to us as soon as it's completed. So I would like that to be part of the motion, if possible, because I'm not really sure. Before I second, I would like to, or, Kate, did you make a motion right
Yeah,
now?
she made the motion.
So,
And she included the traffic study being a priority.
And so I would add to that motion then to report on the business access.
right, but I want to make sure it's a fully comprehensive traffic study that impacts the businesses on that corridor. So I just don't want just a traffic study. I want to know the impact that it has on the businesses and what that looks like. Due to the, and I'll just lead into my question then. Because I want to know how much flexibility does the design team have looking at then lane configurations on the businesses.
Vice Mayor, Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, I'll give you an example. We went through this very thing in Mesa with the Gilbert Road extension. For 2+ years, the conceptual design and the initial design included 2 roundabouts because it was assumed that would that would accelerate, or it would flow, create a smoother flow and would create better access. As we went into the final design and we did this same kind of comprehensive study, we realized that on one of the roundabouts, that's exactly what happened. We adjusted or tweaked that design to get a better design and flow. But on the second one, we found that it created actually conflicts. It created conflicts with the adjoining businesses. It actually took some land that we hadn't anticipated and created a negative impact on the businesses that we did not anticipate from preliminary designs. It didn't come out until we did this comprehensive study. When you drive down Gilbert Road Extension, which is now under construction, you will only see one roundabout. We changed the design. That was a fairly significant change in the design based on the results of that additional study that happened through the final design phase. We'll do the same thing on South Central. As we go down and look at that, we anticipate that there won't be a series of serious changes because we've done more here than we have previously. We've really looked at this thing carefully, especially as part of the environmental assessment. However, we recognize that as we go through and do this comprehensive, more finite design, that there could be issues, and we're ready to address those. We're not stuck in one area. We will do what we have to maintain our basic goals, which is once again to preserve that legacy. So yes, we will make those changes. We'll come back and let you know what that is, and we are open. If the data shows something that runs counter to what we have assumed, we will make the change to meet the data, what the data shows.
Thank you, because that's,
Okay.
I mean, those are the discussions that I've been having. So I just want to be very clear that it's part of what we do when we move forward.
Absolutely.
Only because I heard great concerns of the businesses and have been deeply entrenched in this whole part of the corridor. Before I make the second, I just want to say that as a native of Phoenix and really understanding and growing up in the area, around the area of South Phoenix, and understanding the nuances of that area and the families, the families of legacy that live there and generations, I understand that the impact that this is going to have, good, but there are also going to be some pieces where it's going to be different than what it is today. And my dream of this whole piece is to continue the legacy of SOFO, because Victor, who him and I have been working way back since 13 years when I first heard the concept in, I think, 2006, 2007, he has had and has worked within that community the great vision that he sees for that area of the vibrancy. Eva Olivas, who has been entrenched in the city all these years, who I have great respect for, and her understanding our community and the challenges and the strengths that we have, I trust her and her ability and her opinion as to, yes, this is good. Same with Petra, because I have those relationships and I trust what is being said is going to happen. The other piece is Bobby Wade, Evolve. I sit when I go to Mesquite, stand outside in the evenings with my daughter and watch the girls dance. Even though the curtains are there, there's always these little, go put our heads to the windows and peek in just because she wants to see.
I've heard of peeping Toms, but never peeping Laura's.
So it's actually peeping Sophia. And understand the greatness that you bring to our community, especially for the young women, and having activities at night for them over the weekend and during the weekends. So I understand the great value that these small businesses bring to our city. And so I have great hope that this change will also change the dynamics of South Phoenix, in the sense of it will bring more vibrancy, it will bring businesses to a whole nother level. It will also bring other elements that will want to come in that area. So I will second the motion that Councilwoman Gallego has given in the hopes that this is what's going to happen. So
And Vice Mayor, if I might, not only confirm that your hopes and observations are exactly what we are committed to doing. A couple things, not only from an institutional or an agency commitment, but I too have a personal commitment to this. No, I did not grow up in South Phoenix, but most of my business success came in South Phoenix. I was building homes there when no one else was building homes there. It was with George and Cody and their tours, and built about 1,000 homes between 20th Street and 19th Avenue, between Broadway and Dobbins. And so I got a feel for how unique and special this is. But every neighborhood is special. Downtown Mesa was special. 19th Avenue North was special and unique. And what we've learned through experience, which South Central will benefit from, is that one of the most important things we do is two things. Number one, recognize that this kind of investment will make a change. And we understand that change is scary. There's nothing wrong with being concerned or scared of change. But two things. Number one, our experience has been that when you make this size of investment, it brings good change and improved change. And most of the fears along light rail have not played out. The positives where we've built light rail in this valley have far exceeded any negative changes that have come, and we're committed to making sure that's our experience on South Central. So you have not only my agency commitment, but also my personal commitment, because I do take this personal, because I remember when this was a far different place, and I've been amazed, just driving down Baseline the other night, amazed when there was not a shopping, the gardens were there, not a grocery store or anything. It was a little cluster there at 16th and Baseline, a C-store, and to see what's gone on in that community and how it's maintained its heritage, but yet progressed so far in the last 20 plus years has been amazing. I too am excited as to where this project will take that part of town, and also just south of downtown, the warehouse district, and all that will happen, and even into downtown, and some of the exciting things that we're doing that this line will, which you don't talk about a lot, but when we get into downtown and the changes that will make even in our downtown area, as we now then have really an extended and basically a two lines light rail system that will really change how light rail is used, not only in South Phoenix, but literally around the valley. It opens up a whole new world for everybody. That's why we're excited.
Navarro's oranges. You know that one.
I have one more card, doesn't wish to speak, but in favor, Patrick Brennan. Thank you. I'm going to support the motion. It's been a long time coming, and I understand that people are fearful of change, and it is disruptive. It's not easy to take this forward, but the benefits outweigh the pain in the long run. And as Mr. Smith said, the changes already that have occurred are so impressive, and I know that this is just going to add and not really diminish what South Phoenix has always been and will always be. It's a very special place. And as you also said, this is going to change a lot of things, because now we have to name, because we will have intersecting light rails. I mean, the whole thing is very exciting and very progressive, and thank you both for supporting this. All in favor, please
Could I
say aye.
ask two quick questions? I
If they're
apologize.
quick.
All right.
No, I'm kidding.
So I have heard a lot from constituents that they really want this to be an economic engine, but also really important as jobs in the community. And there are already great efforts going on with our nonprofit community on economic development and jobs. Are there opportunities to work with the people who are already working on employment issues in the area and connect them with opportunities?
Councilwoman Gallego, I think what you'll see as this goes through is that this is a whole different effort than what we've done in the past. In the past, we've tried to include other businesses and get away from just the big contractors and make this just a construction period type of opportunity. I think what you'll see as this rolls out in the next couple of years is that from our design team to our construction team to our business assistant team, we're looking at this as being more of a long-term, more of a permanent, a workforce development, a nice little phrase we use, but really to not only just say, hey, we have a job here for you, but we have an opportunity, a long-term opportunity, and we're really focused with our contractors and with those other participants in the community, both the nonprofits and the others, to creating and finding ways to create long-term, whether it be job training, whether it be business opportunities, whether it be other kinds of opportunities that this kind of investment will create. So yes, you'll see a much, not only renewed, but a heightened and a different and a pretty exciting effort, broad-based effort to create those kind of economic opportunities, take advantage of what this investment will bring. Not only a construction job, but a game changer that creates connectivity and everything. So that is at the forefront of our plan.
Wonderful. And just want to say a thank you to, there's so many people in this room who helped get us here today. It really has been quite an impressive effort, and certainly Congressman Pastor really, with that first grant, was enormously helpful. But we had Mayor Stanton meeting with the Secretary of Transportation. We had several people from the business community who flew out to DC to advocate for this extension. We got great support from nonprofits. The Ford Foundation has put in investments into helping make sure we have equitable transit-oriented development. So this has been a great partnership. All of my colleagues have had meetings with the federal government on behalf of this extension as well. So Valley Metro has been out there. It really has been a great partnership, and there are a lot of people who made today possible, including Albert Santana, who celebrated his birthday yesterday and was working on this presentation on his birthday. So I just want to take a little bit of a moment to say thank you for the team effort that has gotten us here today.
When you turn 29 again, you can do that.
Yes, happy 29th. To
I'll take 29.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
Thank
for
you.
all the work that you have done and will continue to do. Takes us to item 9, T2050 Mobility Program Prioritization.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, thank you. From the Street Transportation Department, Ray Dovalina, our Street Transportation Director, and Eileen Yazzie are here to present on the T2050 Mobility Program. With that, I'll turn it over to Ray for the presentation.
Thank you, Mario. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. As we move ahead with several of the programs that we have under street transportation through T2050, as you probably recall, we have about 4 programs, pavement maintenance, new and expanded streets, technology, and this particular one is mobility that we're going to talk to you today. Also, we give credit to the Citizens Transportation Commission. They provided a lot of comments to us to kind of redefine what we're going to be showing you today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eileen Yazzie.
Sure. Good morning. All right. Good morning, Chair Williams and members of the T&I subcommittee. One of the things is what Ray had mentioned is that there are 4 programs. This is one of the 4 programs. And this one, it does have an opportunity that some of the others don't. The maintenance program, as well as with our new and expanded roadway programs, those are focused on our arterials. The mobility program, we have the opportunity to go do bike and ped and safety improvements on local streets, the neighbors, and the collector streets. So with this, we took that as an opportunity to look at things slightly different and have in-depth conversations with our CTC committee or commission to figure out how we are going to move this forward. So where we are at today is that we've discussed and at length with the Citizens Transportation Commission criteria and factors for assessment. They have recommended approval of locations of projects to move forward with for further assessment. So we want to hear your input and discussion and possibly move this forward. So some of the factors that were discussed with the Citizens Transportation Commission were about connecting people to transit, about looking at where people bike and ped that are also in low income areas, and then also looking at our bus stops. Are they ADA accessible? Can people get to them safely and efficiently? Also looking at high crash locations for fatal and serious injuries for cars and bicycle and pedestrians. And as well as looking at our schools, is do our schools that have the highest number of kids walking and biking to school, do they have safe infrastructure as well to get those kids to and from school? With these factors, we found 11 different data sets. This is also explained in your City Council report. It's explained in tables. It's also explained visually in maps. So we found our 11 data sets and explained these visually And again, these included, sorry, I'm going to grab my notes here. These included, again, we were able to specifically identify where we have ADA non-accessible bus stops, which means that the route to the bus stop does not meet ADA accessible provisions that include the slope, the surface, ramps, or curb ramps. We also looked at zero-car households, schools lacking infrastructure, households below the poverty threshold, crashes, as well as with our current bus boardings as well. So we looked at 11 different factors, and from there, each one of those factors was scored and ranked. And at the end of the analysis, we were able to identify about 39 priority locations in the city that saw these gaps analysis, and as well as where people are known to be walking and biking as well. So the final product was looking, and we found these kind of 39 hot spots in the city where this infrastructure could be needed. So the recommendation out of the Citizens Transportation Commission was twofold or two-part. The first area of recommending is that they recommended that we move forward to do project assessments, really to define how long projects are, say sidewalks, as well as the cost of these, on to do improvements for our sidewalks on the arterials that are known to be non-accessible bus stops. We have that through our bus stop database inventory. On there, we have about 47 locations in the city. Some of the bus stops and the sidewalks will be addressed through other major projects. This information is map number 3 and table A in the City Council report. The second part is related to those 39 priority areas. Is the CTC recommended that city staff move forward with conducting mobility assessments for the top 11 prioritized locations. We started out with 10, and then we moved actually the prioritized number 20 location up to number 11 because it currently, the City of Phoenix Housing Department, they have a planning grant, a $1.5 million planning grant, and that was actually our number 20. So we're gonna move that up to number 11 and actually leverage that. And our area is a little bit bigger than theirs, but we said if they're out there right now, which they are, we want to make sure we're capturing all of that valuable information. So that was the second part of the recommendation. And some people have asked, well, what is a mobility assessment area going to do, and what's the outcome of it? At the end of the day, well, the first part is we did all this analysis. We found out that this area is missing mobility, like sidewalks, streetlights, bicycle lanes, and safe crossings. So we want to now further go into all the details of that. Where exactly are we missing these sidewalks? What is important to the community? That's a big one that we want to go. We want to go meet with the residents in these areas, work with the neighborhood specialists out of the city, and figure out what is this that is a priority for this community. And then as well as at the end of the day, we need some cost estimates. So if we know that we're missing a sidewalk from point A to point B, how much is that actually going to cost and how long will that take? So that's what's going to come out of the mobility assessments. The next steps would be if the TNI does recommend approval is to move forward that through City Council, I believe. And then over the summer is that we would complete the assessments of the first part of the recommendation of looking at the arterials and the sidewalk improvements. And then it would take about 9 to 12 months to do the mobility analysis. We think more around 9 months. So we would be back with progress reports to the CTC and TNI if you so wish, and then come back with any recommendations before we move forward with projects. So in the report, and also what's on the PowerPoint, is the recommendation that the Citizens Transportation Commission gave, and this was a two-part. That the first part was they recommended approval in February, and the second part was in March. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you. These data sets, the maps were wonderful. It was neat to see. We often see these one at a time in different presentations, and to see them all together was really interesting. So thank you for compiling all of that data. One question that we did sometimes get when we were doing the efforts leading up to Transportation 2050 was folks who said, I would take the bus, but I choose paratransit because I don't have a safe route to my bus. Did we look at any paratransit data or data about where people might, like destinations for Dial-A-Ride to see?
members of the T&I subcommittee, we did not. We can go back and look and during the mobility assessments, fold that information into that assessment. We did not, though, include that information.
It was just, there are some, I think, very common destinations in particular for Dial-A-Ride, and maybe just looking at if we have the top 3 places that people go with Dial-A-Ride, making sure we have good ADA accessible infrastructure near them might pay dividends. But this, you have done a ton of data analysis, and this is really, really useful, so thank you. And we're also looking at, in addition, it talks specifically about schools, but other destinations that people might commonly walk to. Like one that comes up in my district is we have a lot of people, Cass is not in the homeless service campus. Just a lot of pedestrian activity around
Yes.
that, and I'm sure there are others throughout the city. So really look at that to make sure those folks have safe
Yes,
crossings as
Madam
well.
Chair and Councilwoman Gallego, yes, we certainly can look at that and add to the data set aspects of it, so.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for compiling all this data. It will be very useful, I think, for many different purposes, but particular for this one. Move approval of staff's recommendation.
Vice Mayor, did you have any comments?
I'm
Second?
I'm trying to put all the pieces together, where I'm trying to figure out map aid, table A, get a bigger vision here.
Sure, I can clarify. So Table A, that's the first part of the motion that relates specifically to map 3. So map 3 visually shows you those locations on a map for, again, and it also, the deeper the color on the map is the higher rank of, which is attributed to the number of riders for that bus route.
Okay.
So those locations specifically in that map and on the table, we have already identified that they have non-ADA compliant pathways or sidewalks to that bus stop.
So like I'm looking at this cluster in the middle center of the map, and it's yellow. It's all different colors. So
Yeah,
does that mean?
Madam Chair and Vice Mayor Pastor, in that portion, I believe that's Central Avenue, and that's the bridle pathway, where it's
Oh, okay.
historic and,
Yeah.
Right, and
yeah.
sure, and if I can also add on to that specific location, members of T&I, part of the project assessment phase, when we do and go out, when staff goes out and assesses these locations, we will come back kind of looking at that Table A with information about, can we do projects, can we not do projects, how long also will they take, because we do have some constraints related to the historic bridle path if we actually can or cannot do improvements.
Actually, my question is, if you coordinated with the Parks and Development, we have a whole trail system throughout the city, and I hope that that is part of your consideration, that we aren't trying to concrete equestrian trails
Correct.
or bike.
Madam Chair, we're not doing that. No, this is not looking at that. We're trying to do the biggest effort to try to connect to our transit services and what areas and corridors we need to have update ADA compliant ramps and sidewalks, so we have the opportunity for people to walk to the transit stops. I think that's the bigger goal.
Correct, it
on
is.
this mobility aspect of it.
I'm just concerned you're going to put a sidewalk
Yeah.
where it shouldn't be, or where the neighbors
Yes.
don't. Do you have meetings with the neighbors to talk about this, discuss, make sure they're in agreement?
Sure. Members of the T&I specifically, as I noted in the previous slide here, particularly for our mobility areas, that's actually why we're taking 9 months, is so we go out and we work with the community. Recently, I think with a lot of our Complete Streets effort and bicycle and pedestrian project efforts, when we've had community meetings, they have been overwhelmingly helpful. Again, whether it's positive or negative information, that's information that is useful for all of us around this table and many more people to make decisions about what is a priority and what projects can or should not go forward. So that's why, again, specifically with the mobility area assessments, we will be going out to those communities. When it comes to the sidewalks on major arterials, that's part of our initial assessment. Again, we know that another hotspot area is on Camelback Road, east of 44th Street on the west of City of Scottsdale. We know that from previous efforts that some people have not been in favor of those. we're not going to go just, the city is not going to go walk out there and just start pouring down asphalt. We will be able to, again, from doing collection of previous information from other departments, we will then figure out if we need to take longer to do that project, and again, go work with the community.
Thank you.
So, my second, well, I guess what would be easier for me or for, I don't know if my colleagues, is that in item 2, I see these little hot spots, but I don't know the areas. I can't, my
Sure,
eyes are
if
too
you-
tiny and.
Sure, if you-
I mean, my eyes are too old.
Sure. So the recommendation for number 2, it relates to map number 13, which has specific numbers on the areas. And it's also related to table B, which also kind of does a laundry list of the parameters of each one of those numbers. Table B is, I believe, the tables are before the maps.
Oh, that's in a different packet.
Yeah, the
Okay.
attachment.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right, got it. I'll just study it later. And then
Did you second the motion?
sure, second.
Okay.
And then mobility area assessments?
Yes.
That, is that box? I'm sorry.
So this is an example. So the picture on this slide is an example of, it's the recommended number 11 mobility area.
Okay.
So each one has its own boundary. So we will be going out and doing 11 mobility area assessments. So
That's
11 individual assessments, not the whole city. So we'll be looking at those top 11 numbers that relate in map 13 and the first 11 listed on table.
I'm trying to put all
Right.
the pieces together.
Yeah, so we have 11 separate bounded areas that we're going to go, that we want to work with the community, do an assessment again and inventory too. What are the vehicle counts in there? Do we have known pedestrian crashes? Kind of really drill down and again, come up with a recommended plan for each of those areas, which is prioritized.
Vice Mayor, council members, I'm not sure, I wasn't able to get here in time to get a map, but I'm not sure what areas you're talking about. But one thing I do want to make clear, as you heard the staff that's sitting at the table now, where they have been contacting the neighbors, that is incorrect. On the Booker T. Washington Neighborhood Association, that has not happened. There is, we have about 35 residents that make up the Booker T. Washington. And there is I don't know how the city is doing this now, but there's an overlay of another neighborhood association over us. So we are very outspoken, and we make our views heard and known, and they completely avoided us on a process that I believe has come to this committee and gone forward. Now, whether this is in today's plan, I don't know. I apologize, but I hope that the staff looks at that a little closer. I hope it was just something that was overlooked and they meet with us so we can get down to some of these issues, because it is going to affect us.
And you will make arrangements, can you meet with them after this meeting and
Madam
arrange
Chair,
that to happen?
Madam Chair, yes, we certainly.
Thank you.
So basically, Chairwoman, the staff has been meeting with the East Lake Park Association group, and not with the Booker T. Washington Association, because our views are completely different. And this is an ongoing issue, and it's not only with streets, neighborhood services, every department, especially planning, okay? Definitely planning, and I think that's an issue we need to deal with. So I hope that the staff will sit down with us and meet with us. Thank you.
I believe our Mario can explain that to the other departments. He's okay?
I will.
And make sure that you are included either separately or at least in a joint meeting.
And
so that you
I made a reference to my cane at the last meeting. I didn't know what it was going to take to make these people listen.
Aha.
So those of us that use canes, you know what I'm talking about? So whether it's tripping or bumping somebody or
No, I'm sure you wouldn't do that.
No, I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't do that. Thank you very much for your time.
The other department you need to speak with is airport.
Okay,
Yes, the aviation department.
very good.
We've been getting the most work with aviation, mainly because of the residents have some ties there from prior issues that have gone on with the aviation department. But I think the newer departments and what's going on in our neighborhood needs to be addressed.
Very good.
Thank you.
And if that doesn't happen, just let us know. Thank you. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Brings us to item 10.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, item 10 is an update on the I-10, I-17 corridor master plan and next steps for implementing these recommendations. And so here at the table are Tom Remus, our freeway coordination manager, and Ray Dovalina, our street transportation director, along with Bob Hazlitt from Maricopa Association of Governments to give this update. I'll turn it over to Tom for the presentation.
Hey, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. As Mario said, we're here today to provide an update on the Interstate 10, Interstate 17 corridor master plan. I know you've seen a presentation earlier this year with the recommendations, but today what we want to do is focus into the bridge crossings, the new interchanges going across I-17. I know there's been a lot of discussion out in the community about how are those going to happen, what's the timing, how will they be implemented, will there be community and business input? So what we'd like to do today is have Bob walk us through what that process looks like, where those opportunities are, talk a little bit about the design that I think was put out there during the public input process. There were some designs presented that I think are new to this state, and I think there's a lot of questions about that as well.
I think you're right.
So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob, who could walk through. I know his PowerPoint presentation goes into a lot more depth, but I think Bob's going to focus on really those interchanges and the impacts. Because as we found through the spine study, more traffic goes over the I-17 than actually travels on the I-17. And that's why some of these recommendations came forward. So
Thank you. And
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here. I think I was just here last month talking about the recommendations that we have for the corridor master plan. Before I get into the presentation, though, I want to talk a little bit about a parallel effort that had been going on over at the Maricopa Association of Governments over the last year, and that is what we call rebalancing. We are required to keep, as the funds are coming in from Proposition 400 and other sources, we are required to keep our freeway program in balance, meaning that we don't spend more than we take in. And we were very fortunate starting about a year ago to start taking a look at our ending year balances, and we found that we had surpluses. And in fact, our surpluses amounted to almost $1.5 billion. And so we spent this last year going through and rebalancing the program so that we could account for that extra $1.5 billion and to be able to start to figure out how to spend the money throughout the entire region. As it ended up, and our tentative scenario for this was approved by the Regional Council on March 29th. As it turns out, we have roughly about a $5 billion now freeway program that's been identified for the next 12 years, and roughly a third of those costs are going to be spent on I-10 and I-17, or the corridor master plan area that we've been looking at. So we're very excited about where that's going to go. I just want to do a quick review of what our main recommendations are for the entire corridor master plan. The biggest thing, again, that we had recommended was to improve safety by modernizing the interstates. Parts of Interstate 17 were built before the interstate system even was signed into law by President Eisenhower. In fact, it's got its life started as Arizona State Route 69 before it became I-17. And so as we started going through this, it became very important to us to figure out how to modernize the interstate. And one of the biggest things that was part of that modernization was looking at all the traffic interchanges. When you put this entire corridor together that you see highlighted on screen, there's roughly 31 traffic interchanges, and 24 of those interchanges have been recommended for some type of reconstruction or improvement to again, accommodate today's traffic, as well as Tom had talked about. Most of the times when we look at interchanges, we only look at the freeway main line. We forget about the traffic that crosses over. And so as we got into it, we found out there's more traffic crossing the 17 than actually using 17. And so what we wanted to do was to make certain that we could facilitate those crossings. Now, one of the things that we had identified as a potential improvement, and again, this is just a concept that's been identified, but this is a type of interchange that's been identified and has been used in other parts of the country. In fact, the very first one of these interchanges was built at the Interstate 395, and it's the roadway that leads to the research lab that serves the Federal Highway Administration. So these interchanges have been around for some time, but as Tom had identified, we haven't used one yet here in Arizona. And what we were trying to do when we were looking at the improvements, we had to at least come up with a concept that we could kind of figure out what we think the costs are going to be at these interchanges. And so we met with ADOT, we met with city staff, we met with a number of folks to try and figure out that we think that this is probably the best possible interchange that we could do that would be the least invasive in terms of requiring bits and pieces of rights-of-way, that this would probably be the one that we could fit in the tightest right-of-way that we have, because Interstate 17, unfortunately, isn't blessed with a lot of right-of-way. It's a very tight roadway, and we're trying our best to make certain that we could fit within that. And so we kind of settled upon this, but this is not by any means a done deal. There still has to be, ADOT still has to do their due diligence, and they have to do their designs and go through and meet not only with the agency stakeholders, but also with the business leaders and the businesses along that would be impacted by this to make certain that we get the right possible design. And so again, we worked with this potential concept. And as I stated, through the rebalancing, it became incumbent upon us to go ahead and start scheduling some of these projects to move forward. And so one of the things that we were able to identify as part of rebalancing is that 8 of those traffic interchanges could be fixed during the next 12 years, but that most of the construction probably wouldn't start to happen until probably 2021. When we look at our cash flow and we figure out when things would happen, it would have to all start to happen about that time. So there's still plenty of time before a concept like this would be moved anywhere towards design, and before it would be completely vetted, obviously, with many of the stakeholders in the area. One of the things I wanted to point out too is that we right now have tentatively everything identified not happening until after 2021. But there is going to be a May scheduling event where we're working with all of our member agencies to try and make certain we can get better idea of when the scheduling can happen. And included in that, we will be working with Valley Metro and Phoenix Transit to make certain that we can kind of coordinate this. One of the things that's of concern to us is that on a couple of these locations, we don't want to just do the interchange and then come back later, and then there's light rail construction, and before you know it, you have a prolonged construction season. We'd like to try to button that up as best as possible to make certain that we could get these improvements done simultaneously, so we can have the least amount of impact to the businesses as well as to the people that actually travel through these areas. Another big part of our recommendations are the bike and ped crossings. This is just an example of one that was built at 63rd Avenue at Loop 101 in Glendale. But being able to have non-motorized transit get back and forth across the freeway corridor was extremely important as part of our recommendations. And what we did was we went ahead and followed all the recommendations that's been adopted by council for the Phoenix Bike Plan to make certain that we could get more of those crossings, and those crossings would be funded by the freeway program. They wouldn't have to come from another source. As I had mentioned, we had public meetings on the entire corridor master plan. To date, we've received something on the neighborhood of about 700 comments that folks have been talking with us about. And I just want to give you just a kind of a Cliff Notes version of what people said. We looked at what people's thoughts were about doing the entire strategy that we have identified. And as you can see here, we have more people agree than disagree. And we feel that we must be on the right track. We did ask questions about right-of-way acquisitions because, again, as I'd stated, there's parts of 17 where I think we've got less right-of-way than some city streets. And so we wanted to start asking, okay, what are your thoughts about it? Again, we were very surprised, but almost 60% of the folks said, yes, if you're going to have to take right-of-way, go ahead and do it right. Don't try to squeeze something in there that doesn't fit and doesn't work. We've had a couple of minor changes to our corridor master plans. I'll just briefly go through those. We had a direct HOV ramp that was identified up at Sky Harbor, but there's been a lot of advanced planning that's been going on about the West Phoenix access, or pardon me, Sky Harbor access, the west access, as we're getting ready for the SkyTrain, as well as getting ready for a new transportation center that the airport's been contemplating, and some new taxiways. And so that made this recommendation just doesn't work. The city of Tempe had asked us to go ahead and consider another bike ped crossing that kind of works with their Bike It plan that they have in their city. The other thing here in Phoenix, originally we didn't look at doing any improvements to Glendale Avenue, any significant ones, but a lot of folks, particularly economic and community development and streets, came back to us and said, well, that's the road that kind of gets you into Scottsdale in some respects, and so it would make good sense to make certain that that interchange is also fixed. And so we went ahead and added that to it, and as part of the rebalancing, it's now funded. So we felt pretty good about that. And then the last one, we got a lot of folks talking about this Osborne Road bike overcrossing. It's part of the bike plan, but a lot of folks have talked to us about the history behind that, and we're just asking right now that we're just going to remove it, but we're waiting for guidance from the city before we move any further with that. Oops.
Hey, can you go back and talk, I'm concerned about where you show that first photo.
Sure.
Is that a stack? Could you describe what I'm looking at?
Certainly. Let me get right back to it. There we go. Okay.
Okay, how far does that go and what does it really do?
Okay. It is a third level, if you would, to the interchange. Right now, most interchanges are 2 levels. You have the one level being the freeway itself, and the other level being the roadway that's being interchanged or being intersected with. In this particular design, what's being suggested is that we go ahead and put a third deck on top that would take care of that through traffic for the roadway that's crossing the freeway. As I stated earlier, we have more traffic crossing the freeway than actually using the freeway itself, and so we wanted to start to be able to facilitate that movement. Where it touches down and how far back it reaches, it's several hundred feet on either side of the interchange, and that does introduce an issue of working with our businesses that are in the area, particularly because you have mainly businesses that locate near interchanges. We'd want to make certain that whatever is identified through there, that they still have a good access to their property, despite having the extra deck. What we found is that right now most of the businesses usually rely on what we call right-in, right-out access. They don't really have that left in. And what we're finding here is that this is not going to affect any of the right-in, right-out access. There's a couple of places where we do have some left-ins, and of course, working through this, we'll have to work with business owners to make certain that what we're doing is we can mitigate this as best as possible so that they can have the best possible access. And that's going to take some time to work through that process.
I also have concerns that you would be going ahead with this project when light rail is so uncertain. It just seems like, why would you spend money if light rail does go across there in the future, and you hadn't incorporated into the plan, but then it hasn't been approved by council for any date for construction or to proceed. So I'm wondering how soon you plan on doing something at this intersection, and if you're going to wait to see if the council pre-approves something for light rail or not. I mean, there's so many questions about it. I've just got some concerns.
Certainly, Madam Chair. First off, again, as I'd stated, the construction on any of these interchange, and this is recommended not just at the Camelback location where that's being considered right now for light rail. It's been recommended now in another 5 locations on the throughout the corridor, and we're making these recommendations because the traffic is getting to the point where we need to have something better than what we have today.
Oh, I agree with that.
And that's why this type of interchange seems to work. The one thing that really helps us out with Camelback is that the light rail can be very successfully integrated into this design if it happens here or if it was to happen at another location. And the primary reason is that you could put the light rail up on that top deck, and then the light rail would not have to conflict with the traffic intersections that you would have for the traffic entering and exiting the freeway. And the thing that we're always concerned about there is that we don't want any traffic backing out onto the freeway, because the freeway is a free flow facility. And so when we start adding a light rail connection to this, we always want to try to make certain that it can get through there in time. This would take it completely out of the equation and would allow us to have a much better flexibility and protect the freeway main line, and also prevent possible crashes, rear-end collisions that would happen on Interstate 17. So again, the recommendations that we have really support the traffic demands that we see in the area. It certainly can easily accommodate the light rail. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do this with the light rail. We're just saying that we need this because there's just a lot of demand that's in the area. We have so much traffic crossing over 17, hence the reason that we think that this interchange design has a lot of possibilities. Again, ADOT still has to go through and do their studies before we could settle upon this design.
I mean, I totally agree that this is a road that has tremendous traffic and does need relief. I just know that with the potential of light rail, that would change the bridge design, because you would need probably a greater distance to go that height for the train, the elevation, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know how that impacts the businesses, but it concerned me when I heard that you had the funding and you were going to proceed. And I don't think most people on the council were aware of it, and we
No.
had not approved anything for light rail, and it just seems strange to me. Tom, did you have a comment?
Madam Chair, perhaps Bob could also talk about the timing. I know there's been some discussion that ADOT is doing some early work. So Bob, maybe if you could touch on what the timing looks like. What is ADOT doing now, and what are those next steps that will happen?
Well, right now, particularly at Camelback Road, which I think is the one that I think is kind of spurring a lot of this conversation. The present construction timeline that we have on it is that we probably wouldn't see any construction starting until about 2021. And that gives us a significant opportunity that if the decision is for light rail to occupy this corridor, that we could coordinate that construction to happen simultaneously, so that we can minimize the impacts to the entire corridor itself. Again, ADOT still has a whole host of studies that they have to go through. They have to do their environmental studies, they have to do their design studies, they have to do their interchange selection reports. It's a pretty extensive list of things that they still have to do. And so, again, working with the community, working with the city, that would be these next few steps that would be taken to be able to move forward with this. There's been a lot of discussion about, okay, this is kind of a little bit advanced, that if the light rail corridor would happen maybe later. The idea is that the bridge would be in place by the time the light rail construction would happen, so that there wouldn't be any missing of a heartbeat there in terms of construction. However, there's still a lot of coordination that can be done, and certainly when we're recommending this at 6 locations along Interstate 17, we can kind of move these things around until we get the right design.
I'm just concerned when 21, it sounds like it's a long ways off, but when you're talking these projects, it's
tomorrow.
not. Yeah, it is, it is.
It is.
So, do you have questions?
I do have questions, because 2 of the corridors that I'm looking at, that we'll be looking at rebuilding, are Indian School and Camelback. I personally have not been part of these conversations. I mean, we have these discussions here, but other than that, I'm not part of the conversation. So Camelback, I have many constituents worried about Camelback, and constituents that are pro-rail and anti-rail. So I have great concern about what is happening and how we are getting this information to those communities. And right now, in listening to the dialogue, I have a vision that, and I don't know if it's correct, so you can correct me, that there's going to be a stack, or that there's going to be a stack where the light rail is going to go over the bridge. Am I getting this vision?
Cars.
Or cars, or how? I don't know.
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Pastor, that is just the concept that's been identified, that there would be another deck that would be considered as part of the reconstruction. We looked at trying to figure out other ways to try and get traffic from point A to point B. One of the biggest concerns we have is there's a lot of very large traffic generators, Grand Canyon University to name one. We're trying to figure out how to be able to accommodate the growing demand at that particular location. But unfortunately, we're in an area where we have businesses that are right up next to the roadway, and those businesses are extremely important. And so we're trying to figure out ways here to try and keep the design as least invasive as possible, so that we can make certain we can accommodate that traffic demand, and then at the same time too, ultimately accommodate the any part of public transportation that would be in the corridor.
Where would you start? I'm just visualizing, and I'm like thinking of Camelback. Where would they get up on the ramp?
Most of the preliminary looks that we've had on this is that it begins roughly about 2 to 3 blocks on either side of it. Believe it or not, it doesn't, because I-17 is depressed in that area, and we kind of keep the intersection where all the movements are at the same level. It actually goes back only about 3, maybe even 4 blocks. It's not that many. It doesn't go that far on either side, but it would be down in time for in both locations there's signalized intersections that are out. 27th Avenue in particular, it would be down in time to be able to accommodate full movements at those locations.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, if I can also jump in here and just hopefully provide some clarification. The work that Bob is talking about is something that's being brought forward by MAG and working with ADOT and with the city, of course, and it's really responding to that east-west traffic that's going across the freeway and need to address the large traffic congestion that's being experienced today and is only going to get worse in the projections for the future. And so even though light rail is something that comes up as part of the conversation, I think it's important to recognize that these projects at these interchanges, Indian School, Camelback, Glendale, Northern, and these others, are proposed to move forward, and regardless of what happens with light rail, even if there's no light rail, the discussion is that these interchanges would be moving forward. That the platform diamonds would be looked at as the design, and so it does provide an opportunity, since we're also talking about extending light rail potentially along Camelback Road. That's you pointed out, that's a decision that still needs to be made by the City Council. But it does present an opportunity for light rail to be integrated, as Bob pointed out, with that project as well. But even without light rail, these are proposed to address that east-west vehicular traffic.
I asked for this to be put on because I understand the problem. I look forward to solutions, but truthfully, there are some very large businesses, especially an auto or dealer or two, that contribute an awful lot of sales tax to the city of Phoenix, and I sure as heck wouldn't want their business impacted in any way to diminish that tax revenue that we gain from them. So I think it's very important, however this is designed, that it accommodates our businesses along that route. Camelback is one of the reasons it has the traffic is because of those businesses, and they are extremely important to this city. And then secondly, I just want to be assured that we're maximizing those dollars in every way, that we anticipate the future And if you're going to build it, not only do you accommodate those businesses, whether it takes, you stretch it out further or whatever it takes, but light rail is considered, because I would hate to have to go back and retrofit and have the city of Phoenix have to make that type of expense in the future. And I think it's just important that it's all inclusive. And I was very disappointed that I had to hear that they've been having public meetings on this and we hadn't heard anything about it. When we talk about a spine study, this was never mentioned. And this has more impact on the city of Phoenix than that spine study, the total package. And I just think it was extremely important to bring this and have this discussion. So, Vice Mayor, did you have another comment?
So I'm going to echo what you're speaking about, because I know of several businesses that sit on the I-17 that are going to be impacted by what's going to happen, and they have spent billions of dollars to revitalize that area. And if I was a business owner and spent that money, I would be very upset at the fact that unaware of what's happening, but also what is it that they can do, and how does that look like, and how does it impact? And I know that the study is the reason why I know about this is because on my Phoenix and my community college side, we were receiving emails about it. But on my council side, I was not aware of it. And so there's a disconnect in communication with those that represent those areas. And so it's very disappointing to me. And I'm hoping that then we can engage and see where we move forward. But thank you.
Didn't bring you here to chastise you.
Yeah, no, did not.
Hope you're not interpreting it this way. We just have some concerns about this, and part of it was because we weren't aware of what was going on in part of the conversations.
Well, Madam Chair and members of the committee, these are always steps in the process, and obviously there's some steps that have been a little bit missed here, and we will do better to make certain that those are addressed in the future. I think the biggest part of this is that we've at least identified what we think the problem is. We've got a possible solution, but we also recommend that it's going to take some time to figure out what's the best solution.
Thank you. We do have a couple cards. Peggy, did you want to speak? Peggy Neely, former councilwoman and vice mayor.
Thank you for having me, and Chairman Williams and council members. It's great to be here. Just a couple of things to say today is we were following this journey with light rail. As all of you know, we're concerned about the light rail along Camelback, and Albert had said, oh, now we're going to look at a bridge because the light rail would not be sustained over the current bridge with the weight, with the lines of traffic going around. So that's how we kind of fell into the spine study and began to find out what the design was. And, you know, Mag's done a great job. Bob has answered a lot of questions for us. We have a lot of great concerns. What we were told is that ADOT's next step is, one, to hire a designer, and then secondly, they will then do more public hearings. We're very concerned about the right-of-way takings, and if you were to build the light rail in the middle of the bridge, you're talking about an additional 24 feet that would have to be put in that, affecting the right-of-way on all four corners of the businesses that are there. So our belief is go try these out on other intersections. When you decide what you're going to do with light rail 2026, come back and talk about it. But this is not prudent to start here and put the light rail in and not know if you're going to be building it. That's what I have to say. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. I have cards from Don. Did you want to speak? And David?
Thank you for giving us some time. My biggest concern is the taking of right-of-way. I'm building another facility in Gilbert, and the reason for that is, as I lose business here, I'm going to Gilbert. So that's income to you going away. If the taking of my property, the whole front line, 20% of my retail, goes into this project, that business is going to go to another town. And I think you need the revenue to build this stuff. So I'm hoping in this study they can find ways to shrink this in and not be taking a lot of property from me or my neighbor, who is also a retailer and puts a lot of money in this community. So it's, and the other thing that concerns me is if they design this with light rail and add 24 feet, that's 24 feet more they've got to take on either side of the road, which affects us again. So I really think, can this be put off, and we've had this conversation, put in 2 or 3 other bridges, you're going to do 5, so do in 3 or 4 of them, get that down to where it's quick so that time span maybe is shrunk by experience, and by that time we will know where the light rail goes and whether it needs to be incorporated in this or not. So those are our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Good suggestions. David, did you want to? Okay.
Can I ask?
Councilwoman?
Thank you so much for this update and for the one 2 months ago as well. Could you, sort of a follow-up on question that I asked last time, but could you help me understand how much modeling we do of how traffic flows will change during the construction of the 202 on the I-17, I-10 corridor? Do we look at that?
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, the 202 construction is, again, are you referring to the South Mountain construction?
Yes.
Okay. Most of the South Mountain construction is underway right now, and before any of this would happen on I-10 or I-17, South Mountain would more than likely be open to traffic. As far as looking at the impacts of what the construction is, ADOT has been looking at that. I think one of the big things I know they've been working out is in areas where they have construction to make certain the signal timing's in the right area so they can accommodate the traffic flows with some modified intersections and stuff like that. And so we provide them the data, and they make certain that they model through that to make certain we can minimize any impacts.
There are some of the changes, like particularly in the sort of 19th Avenue area, are happening, I think, at the same time as 202 freeway on more signal timing, I thought.
Yeah, again, I know that some of the signal timing matters. I know that the cities, these are some of the city intersections, and we work with them to provide them the forecast data so that they can make certain that they have the best possible plans. And then at the same time too, like I said, with the construction impacts, they do wherever they can to if they have to do some retimings, that they get those in there so that they can make certain the traffic is accommodated.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, Ray Dovalina, the Streets Transportation Director, and I will sit down with MAG and ADOT to talk specifically about 19th Avenue and I-17 and some of those challenges to make sure we address any concerns before they happen.
That would be wonderful because there's already a lot of traffic flowing through, and it sometimes now takes 4 lights for people to get through the ADOT controlled signal without traffic being displaced for construction. So appreciate that very much. It is good to know we do look at signal timing when we're doing construction, because this weekend there was construction, I think, I-17 in sort of Camelback Indian School, and understand there was some gridlock and some real challenges with signal timing as that construction went forward.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, yes, we do try to have coordination meetings with ADOT as they're doing construction along the I-17 resurfacing project. There was some coordination between DPS that was working the signals at the interchanges, but Streets Transportation is also aware of that construction, so any modifications that need to happen off the freeway system, they could look for that and make those accommodations. As we start moving that I-17 repaving work further south and it gets closer to the stack, I think we're going to start to see some more challenges, so we'll have to work very closely, especially with events that are taking place in the downtown area. This weekend, there was also a challenge because they were doing their routine maintenance work on the I-10 tunnel, and so that created some more challenges for commuters.
Wonderful. The folks at ADOT will have to come up with some fancy slogans to help us remember what's happening and avoid the traffic during these, or the freeways during this time. Thank you. Oh, and I did is there anywhere where we could see a platform diamond interchange with something like a light rail that already exists in the country? I just want to make sure I understand what it looks like.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman McGagor, we'll do a little research and see if we can find that type of operation.
Wonderful.
And you will look at options on perhaps Camelback as one of the first examples. We could look at alternatives to test this program out for this concept.
Yeah, Madam Chair, certainly we'll take that into consideration, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming and spending your time and listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next item is wastewater collection system odor control program update. That's a mouthful.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we have Catherine Sorensen here from Water Services. Actually, for the next two items, Water Services Department will be covering. So I'll turn it over to Catherine for the presentation.
Good morning, Chairwoman Williams, members of the T&I subcommittee. For your finale, we're here to talk to you about wastewater. Wastewater collection obviously is not something that people really like to think that much about, much less talk about. But it is a core function of the Water Services Department, and it's obviously very important to public health in our community. What's interesting about the City of Phoenix wastewater collection system is that we actually have a very large system. We have about 5,000 miles of sewer lines that we maintain, and that matters because it means that our wastewater travels long distances, spends a lot of time in those pipes, jostles around a little bit, and creates hydrogen sulfide, which smells bad, but also is corrosive to our pipes. So to counter those effects, we have a commensurately large odor and corrosion control program. Here with me today to go through the details of this, Vern Vasquez, who is our Deputy Water Services Director over the wastewater collection system, and Assistant Director Dennis Porter.
Thank you. As Catherine stated, the system is very large. It's very dynamic. Wastewater, unfortunately, does come with its odors and the fact that it also has corrosion potential. As the wastewater ages, as the temperature changes, it changes seasonally, it changes daily. Vern and his folks are managing that on a dynamic basis. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of capital, it takes a lot of infrastructure, but we try to continue to improve that daily, annually. We add capital to the program to improve the odor control and the corrosion control. And with that, I want to hand it over to Vern Vasquez. Vern is our regional expert. He's our subject matter expert. He's well known in the valley and in the state because of his experience, both on the technical side, the experience on just dealing with it over 3 decades. So people all over look to Vern for advice. And so we're going to let Vern present the program to you.
And he's very good at going to community meetings.
And he is very good at dealing with the public, yes.
Wow, I hope I can live up to that hype. So again, my name is Vernon Vasquez. I've been with the city, this is celebrating my 30th year with the City of Phoenix. I've been here a while. I've also grown up in the Valley. Quickly before I start the presentation and talk about odor control, it's basically going to be a 101 on odor control, what causes odors in the sewer system, how we're treating them. There's been a tremendous amount of technology that has gone into odor control. It's ever evolving. If you can remember, if you've been here a while, the Durango curve was infamously odorous. When I grew up, it was you wanted to avoid traveling the Durango curve. Somewhere in the late 80s, technology caught up and the ability to actually have effective treatment rather than before treatment, it was masking. So you'd have deodorants to try to hide the odors and mask the odors. Well, now we actually have effective treatment where we're reducing the levels of hydrogen sulfide or we're keeping them into the liquid status and then treating them down the road. So with that, let's see if I, you know which one it is? That one? No, that's the laser. There we go. So as been stated, we are a large system, 5th or 6th largest, depending on the time of day in Wikipedia, what they're going to say we are. We treat a lot of sewer water. My group conveys the sewer water from all buildings, businesses, and homes to one of the 2 treatment plants for the City of Phoenix. Odor control is, it's a natural process. It's caused by bacteria in the sewer water that will overwhelm or take out the oxygen source of the water. The water goes from being aerobic to anaerobic. The bacteria will continue to thrive, but their waste product after that is sulfides. And then the sulfides will turn into hydrogen sulfides. So what this map illustrates is that we have 21 odor control sites throughout the city of Phoenix. So we've been in odor control for probably 22, 23 years. We started off, I remember our very first site that we started off at. It was successful. So now we've grown to 21 sites. We're very successful in treating odors for the city of Phoenix. The thing about treating odors is that there's a plethora of technologies out there. Essentially, they all work. It just depends on specifics of your system, what are the, it's going to happen down at the treatment plant when the water gets there, and the community itself. So this slide also illustrates how our feed sites are strategically planted, but it also talks about we have two different types of odor control. You have transient waters that are conveyed through the pipe, and then you have waters that are captured in either a lift station or like the treatment plants. So there's two different types of odor control. You're treating the liquid phase, and then you can also treat the atmosphere. So odors, as was stated, so there are different situations that will cause the odors. Flat slopes, so that's waters that are flowing really slow, and the bacteria has an opportunity to deplete the oxygen. Temperatures have also an effect. So the higher temperatures, when it's warmer, you're going to get more odor complaints. Bacteria is more active. And then the long travel time. So when it's slow and it's moving and it's hot, you're going to have odors. So odor control is also, it's odor and corrosion control. The thing is, odors control is driven by complaints. So we want to make sure that we're good partners with our customers and that we are effectively treating it, and that we're building our goodwill with our customers. So, and a bit of humor. So as the previous slide that I showed you, the valley picture with all the different odor control sites, that's been years and years in the making of addressing odor concerns. This slide's going to illustrate something that happened in Councilwoman Williams' area that we became aware of. And we had a study performed, and we were able to treat a large section of sewer that we had previously not been able to treat. So we had a consultant come in, do a thorough study, look at a lot of different constituents, and they gave us several options, and we chose what we felt was the best option, which is a chemical feed site on the very farthest north or the beginning of the system. And it's been very successful. As a matter of fact, not only has it treated the area that we targeted, which was around 39th Avenue and Bethany Home Road. That was the main area that we were targeting, but with the chemical that we used, we essentially saw treatment all the way down to Lower Buckeye Road. So that was very encouraging. So in that process, the consultant took physical assessments. So they went out and took samples of the water, they took samples of the atmosphere. The samples were evaluated. Some of them were sent out to laboratories for analysis. And then they came back and said, this is the latest, greatest treatment that's available, and City of Phoenix, here are your options. And so we felt that they did a very good job in putting together the assessment and giving us the options. And what we chose in that was a mixture of chemical treatment for the water, and a point that when they did their analysis, we found that the system was pressurized at one point. There's a bit of a siphon effect as it goes underneath the canal near 39th Avenue and Peoria. And so what that did is that constricted the headspace of the pipe, Well, that caused the atmosphere to back up, so we had a bit of a pressure system. So what we decided to go with is that we're having ferrous chloride is the chemical of choice that's giving us our treatment. And then we're taking out the air where it's pressurized and treating it through a carbon filter system. So it's a combination of two different types of systems, and so far it's very effective. So the next portion of this presentation is to talk about our lift stations and the other portion of odor control. So before, what I talked about was treating the water that's flowing in the pipes and keeping it, either keeping it in solution or actually treating it so you're reducing the sulfide level so it doesn't create hydrogen sulfide gas. In the lift stations, we have where the water is captured and it's sitting in say, a wet well or a tank of some sort before it's lifted and conveyed further into the process, into the collection system. Previously, odor control for that type of system is atmospheric, was to scrub the odors out using various chemicals. They would use a bleach, a caustic solution, and water. And the odors were filtered through that solution, and the foul air was eliminated and fresh air came through. Very effective, but also very expensive, and it's labor intensive, and there's exposure of these chemicals to our staff who have to maintain the systems. So there's another newer technology that's out, very green. The picture up in the far right corner of the presentation is a biofilter. The biofilter uses enzymes that naturally occur in granite. We keep the enzymes alive, we filter the foul air through, and their food source is actually hydrogen sulfide. So they eliminate the sulfide for us, and then it comes out, and it's not entirely fresh air, but it removes 99% of the odor constituents, which is by regulation we have to, regulatory requirements. Right. So what what it does, it smells like, is like wet dirt after a rain. So not necessarily odorous. So we haven't had any complaints, and it's, like I said, it's a very green technology. It's a very simple technology. The manufacturer of this process actually warranties the media that we use for life. So if it ever, for some reason, we need to go back and we find that it's failing, they'll come back and replace it. So we're transitioning from these odor scrubbers to this greener technology. The only chemical we use in there actually is water, just regular water. We just got to keep the bacteria fed with hydrogen sulfide and keep them hydrated. And we really like this technology. So we're moving forward towards it, and we're improving our systems as they age and as they're coming up for remodel or we're replacing them with these. So Lift Station 44 is one of them that's coming up with, we're going to have a new technology, or the newer technology, the green technology, which is the biofilter. It's incorporated, this one is another type of green technology, and it's also a biofilter, but it doesn't use granite, it uses an aqueous solution in the tank, but again, it's using bacteria, and so it's just a different type. So one of the things that we're looking at is we always want to try to stay on the front leading edge of technology. And so we want to keep our eyes open, and this became available. We're giving it a try, and right now it's also successful. So it gives us a couple of tools available to address odor concerns. This site right here is on 50th Avenue, 50th Drive and Cactus. It's a lift station. It's a little long in the tooth, as you can tell. So it's being renovated. And we're also adding an odor control site as well, and larger footprint as well as some other facility improvements.
So if I could just add, one of the things that we also do, not only do we want to use these facilities so that we don't have odor problems, but we also work with the arts department and Percent for Arts program so that as we rehabilitate these facilities, they're also aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood. We want our facilities to be an amenity, not an eyesore in our neighborhoods.
And that is it for my presentation.
I thank you very much. I know I was the one that chattered a lot about this a couple years ago. I learned a lot from all of you. You know, when you think of that, you just think, oh, well, it just goes from A to B. I didn't think about the terrain and going under freeways and under canals and what it took to keep everything moving, because I learned that, you know, in the morning, the evenings, the showers, the whatever, greater flow. Midday, there isn't so much flow to keep things moving. It's a very complex problem. And I really, really appreciate all that you've done to, you know, I thought it was just a coincidence that 39th Avenue and Pinnacle Peak had a problem and 39th Avenue and Peoria had a problem. I didn't realize it was one big line they were all on. So I know that you have put a lot of work into this. You've worked a lot to the neighborhoods. You went out and you've explained it a couple times. We've had a couple challenges along the way, but you've always been very reactive and calmed everybody down and solved the problems, almost. I have been bragging about how great this is. And last Sunday, as we're coming back from the restaurant at 35th and Peoria, my husband says, oh, do you smell that? Yep.
We'll get someone out right away.
That would be me.
But it's that Metro Center area that is booming, and so much more is going into the drains. I don't know if we're going to have to beef up the system there or whatever. But now that you have the expertise, I know you can handle it very quickly. So thank you very much. Anyone comment?
Thank you for your 30 years of service to our city. And thank you to Councilwoman Williams for really spending time on this issue, which is so important to the people who are impacted and finding solutions as well. So
it's one of those projects that really smelled. Did you have a comment, Vice Mayor? No. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we're going to continue our next item till our next meeting. We've gone rather long today. We've been. Is anyone in the public? I don't have any cards that wish to speak. Okay, seeing nothing, anything additional for future agenda items? Hearing nothing, we are adjourned.